Okay, and welcome back to the Sports Integrity Action Month podcast, a podcast made in conjunction with the Sports Integrity Global Alliance, built to support the mission of promoting integrity, good governance, transparency, and accountability in sport. This podcast is made surrounding Sports Integrity Action Month, a month-long global movement designed to deliver more impact, more engagement, and greater participation than ever before. Today, we'll be discussing a couple more of SIGA's core priorities, which are youth development and athlete voices, along with digital integrity. My name is Liam Britnell, and today I'm joined with Lynn Casey. Lynn, you're the CEO and founder of Shine Scout and a member of SIGA America's Advisory Board. So I'd love to get to know a bit more about you, your history, how you got involved in SIGA, and your specializations.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. Always happy to be here. So, yes, I run a global consumer insights and future trends consultancy. I work primarily with Fortune 500 companies. And what we do is I call it map making. I really help companies understand what people are feeling, what's driving their decision making, what they're wanting and longing for. I sort of draw those lines, that trajectory, and I intersect those with the bigger macro trends that are impacting all of us, whether they're geopolitical, whether they're demographic, whether that's psychographic. So it's really helping companies focus their lens on the intersection of these big macro shifts and these really granular subjective feelings that are driving our behavior today. I absolutely love what I do. It keeps me on my toes because I'm always listening and leaning in and trying to intuit where we're going and what it is we want. And I don't think I have to tell you, Liam, that change is happening more rapidly than ever before. So that
Absolutely.
listening has become more and more important, right? So it's interesting work. And I also think it's really, really important work. There's so much, whether it's AI slop or whether it's just noise. I think it's harder and harder for companies to understand what's noise and what's a signal. And my work is to really forward the signals so that we can react authentically and in response to what human beings really want.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, kind of these signals and macro shifts, we can kind of get into how this ties to sports integrity here is
hmm
in this new age of digital presence and integrity concerns. It's one of those big intersections. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that young athletes are facing today in regards to integrity?
Oh my God, so many. I mean, first of all, we're living in a world where integrity is being called into question constantly. Let's just look at the US government right now and what's going on with the Epstein files, right? It's sets such a strange example for young people that, this is their government and these are the type of questions and issues that we're grappling with.
Totally.
So then when you sort of click down into sports, I think what's really, really important to look at firstly, and before we get into this conversation about young athletes and integrity, I think we have to look at the increasing importance of sports, right? So when I talk about macro trends, one of the trends I'm talking with all of my clients about is the rising importance of sports, right? Sports has always been an interesting category and a place that brands like to play. But as the integrity issue continues to surface, where does integrity sit? Where can we believe in heroes? Where is the action authentic, right? There's been two places where I believe human beings are putting their trust, and it's in sports and it's in music, right? This is a
True.
place where we're allowed to come together, get excited, go through the whole panoply of emotions. Look at the Taylor Swift Eras tour, where
Yeah.
70,000 people could fill a stadium and laugh and cry and hold hands and sing. Human beings long for that sort of connection, right? We're pack animals. We want to be together. But there are so few places where we feel that we can honestly come together in a place that's non divisive, right? Non political, non threatening, right? So that might be, filling a soccer stadium, or it might be, filling a music stadium. Those are the two places where we've come alive. And you've watched the attendance for sports, you've watched the attendance numbers absolutely skyrocket. You've watched the emergence of all new subgenres of sports, whether it's like F1, which has become a complete phenomena, to
Hmm.
women's basketball. Last year, we had a landmark moment where two college volleyball teams, female volleyball teams, I believe it was Wisconsin and Kansas, filled a 70,000 person stadium, right? For a women's collegiate volleyball game. We want to be sitting in the front row of authentic action, authentic heroes, right? Something that we can jump on our feet and cheer and feel great about. So I think the whole sports arena has become far more important than ever before. It's become a really sort of sacred gathering space for human beings. So great opportunity for young athletes, right? But a lot more pressure for young athletes, right?
Yeah.
Because now you've got the whole world saying, we need you to be our heroes. It's not going to be politicians, right? It's not going to be corporate executives. Like, where do we find our heroes? So they have to make choices, right, that are in response to that hunger and that need. It's a tremendous amount of pressure. And, how do you walk that walk? How do you talk that talk? Who is guiding you along that way? Right. I look at someone like a Simone Biles, and, I'll give you a contrast. So during the Olympics, we all know that she took a step back and said, something's going on. And I don't feel comfortable getting on the
Yeah.
balance beam. I don't feel comfortable doing something. And it was such a divided response, Liam, right?
Yeah.
Here's a human being saying, I need to protect my own body and my livelihood. And she was shamed by a lot of people. So there
I
was
remember
equal
that.
applause, right? And I mean, I remember having the discussion with a friend of mine who was appalled that she had the audacity to do that. And I'm like, it's a human being who's saying, I can't do this right now
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
So you look at a situation like that where initially she was pilloried and it had such a difficult decision, but she took a stand for herself. And I think this is sort of what we're talking about. Like, how do we help young athletes listen to their own inner voices? How do we help young athletes stand for themselves when no one else will? Particularly when you look at the typical track for a young athlete. Listen to your coaches, listen to everyone else, go the extra mile, dig in a little
Yeah.
bit harder. I don't care if you have a fever. Kobe Bryant's amazing because, he played the entire game with 103-degree fever, right? It's this idea of sacrifice yourself, sacrifice yourself, sacrifice yourself. So how do we help them understand? And yes, you're allowed to take a stand for yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you reflect on exactly how sports has evolved and expanded, because we do see that with the emergence of the smaller sports and with
Yeah.
with new teams and leagues. But with these new expansions, yeah, obviously um, there needs to be a wider range of coverage, especially for sports integrity and just making sure there's safe sport policy in place, specifically for
Yes.
younger athletes who don't necessarily sometimes, they're still learning how they feel in these moments, in these situations. So maybe in youth sports, what are some essential factors of developing safe sport policy? And maybe this would be a good time to also talk about SIGA's universal standards, because youth development is one of the core priorities of SIGA, and there are some universal standards that SIGA has published on their website.
Yeah. And I think it's really, I think so much of what sort of training that has to be happening at the youth level is this bifurcation that we're talking about, right? That tension between pushing past discomfort, because that's how we all grow, right? What I'm amateur runner, and I will tell you, my proudest moments are when I dig in and run, 6 miles in the rain, right? When
Yeah,
we all wake up that day and you feel like you just don't have it, but you do it anyway, right? So that sort of grit and resilience is something that SIGA obviously applauds, something that all of us, want to help us understand how we can push past our limits. But the flip side of that is, how do you know when enough is enough? How do you know when you need to advocate for yourself? And I think this is the training that has to be happening right now. And you made such a good point, Liam. As these smaller footprint sports are beginning to emerge and getting more coverage, it's a major trend that we're watching right now is, again, because of this desire to sit on the sidelines and have an authentic experience, clapping for the local little league team, right? Going to a
Yep.
minor league baseball game, because there's the fun and the joy are still there, right? You're not inundated with corporate sponsorships. You're not inundated with professional athletes. There's still a joy to it,
It's the same
but
game.
it's the same game. But that's
Yep.
a lot of attention now being placed on someone who may not have had the training, right? Who may not be used to coverage. So it's helping people understand that you are a role model, right? That a role model at a time where people are desperate for role models. And integrity starts with integrity for yourself, right? What's
Mm,
real for you? What's authentic for you? What makes sense for you, right? So I think it's really helping young people develop a voice and an advocacy for what they need and for who they are.
absolutely. And I think specifically, like, learning to recognize what you need and finding who you are in your
Mm,
journey with your sporting path or sports integrity. For that, one of the most important things that I've talked about is making sure that these organizations and teams, leagues, or businesses have in place is good whistleblowing policies
mm.
in case of something, or good framework to make sure that there are that there is that kind of outlet in case something were to go wrong. And maybe talk a little bit about what roles whistleblowing policies play in this rapidly expanding development landscape of youth sport. And does it just need to evolve more, or does it need to be more commonly practiced? Because I feel like it's a gap we see quite often.
It's a massive gap. And I think first and foremost, it needs to be systematized, right? So
Yeah.
it can't be right now. I think it exists in a very piecemeal fashion, right? So whether it's, here in the States, AYSO, which is this amateur soccer league for young people, right? And the beauty and the challenge of something like that is your coaches and your umpires, your refs are all volunteers, which is wonderful, right? You've got moms and dads out on the field. However, do they have the training? Do they have the understanding? And do they have, again, like a systematized format that they can fall back on and say, oh, I remember going over this in our training session. This isn't right, right? I need to put a hand up and say no, right? Or maybe it's a policy where after every game, there's a 5-minute check-in with all the players. What felt good? What didn't feel good? Where were
Hmm.
you uncomfortable, right? So again, I think there needs to be some sort of systematized lessons, systematized policies of where is a player allowed to voice their concerns and their thoughts? Where is a parent allowed to voice their concerns and their thought, right? So again, especially in these amateur driven leagues, I think this is where we see a lot of that gray area.
Hmm.
And it's a slippery slope. So for someone like a SIGA to be able to reach all the way down and say across the board, here are the 10 tenets for players' rights, here are the 10 tenets for parents' rights. Here's what you all need to know, like where your voice comes in and where your responsibilities come in, right? And to have a uniform set of rules and regulations that allow for any whistleblower to say, I'm looking at number 8 on the policies that were put in place, and this is where I feel like I need to step in.
Hmm.
It's murky, and I don't think it's set up at the beginning of seasons. So
Yeah,
whistleblowing should not be, even think about the term. Whistleblowing has a little bit of a hysteria attached to it, right? It's
I
like,
can see
oh,
that.
right? As opposed to it's a beacon, it's a lighthouse for good practices, right? So I think part of the work that has to be done is to highlight the power and the importance of whistleblowing. Maybe we even rename it, right? So it sort of sets itself up as a way to keep people safe and a way to help young players develop so that they want to stay in the game. How
Yeah.
many young players leave at an early age because of a bullying coach, right? Because of an unfortunate incident on the field, um, because of just feeling like it's too much. I did a study several years ago um, for a sports tutoring system, and one of the things that really struck me, Liam, is that parents, and this was a global study, parents view youth sports as kind of a third parent, right? So
Mm.
the parent obviously is going to have an impact. The kid is going to have sort of a say and an impact in the whole thing. But sports is something that they're looking to help raise their child with resilience, with grit, with integrity, with understanding how to be on a team, right? How to play well with others, right? How to
Yeah.
commit, how to be responsible, but also, how to know when their limits have been pushed. So it's such a critical piece of forming good, productive, kind, empathetic adults. But therefore, it needs to be sort of swathed in really clear rules and regulations that help keep everyone focused on the good actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And drawing back a little bit on when you said just the importance of systematizing it. If we just say that we put whistleblowing policies in place, it is kind of just performative if it's not upheld, if it's
Mm,
not trained, if it's not actually instilled almost daily, right? To make sure that that avenue is still there. And I know sports policy is one thing that like kind of policies as a whole over the last little while, like we've seen this big shift from them being more reactive to being proactive policies,
hmm. Well put.
to be more preventative than punishing, I guess, is what I would say. But all that to say that it is extremely important for whistleblowing policies to be upheld on an organizational level almost daily. Going in, like what advice would you give young athletes and sport leaders today to help build future athlete development models with integrity at the center?
hmm I think part of it is, and I like what you were saying, proactive versus reactive. I work with a lot of companies that have brand values, right?
Yeah.
And when they have me come in to help them develop brand values or perhaps redevelop them, the question I always ask them is, do you want values that look nice on a mural in your entranceway? Or do you want values that really help drive behavior and help people make good decisions? Because
Yeah.
I'm only interested in the latter. First and foremost, I think it's time has to be spent on really looking at what are the values put in place for teams, for youth athletes, right? And then to spend time, you know, think about John Wooden, the illustrious basketball coach from UCLA fame. And he was all about values. Every player on that team understood what was the most important thing, right? That was to do the right thing. That was to treat the fellow players with kindness and empathy and integrity, right? And to really just always do their best. And that was drilled into them before every single game, right? And so I think for all players, for youth players and for youth player organizers, it's to really spend time before the game even begins on refreshing what are those values and what do they mean to me, right? So,
Yeah.
first of all, you have to really personalize them. You know, I have never seen a set of values that don't include the word integrity. What does that even mean, right? So,
Yeah.
let's define it. Like, let's sit down as a team. So, let's create a calendar where there are 2 sessions before play even begins that are table sessions where we go over those values, where we understand what they mean to each of us, right? And then to give each player the power to raise a hand and say, what does integrity mean to this team, right? What does
Yeah.
personal value mean to this team, right? So again, that sort of table talk ahead of time to really refresh and reinform coaches and players, right? And then what has to be reinforced at home is that each of those players have the ability to raise their hand and push back if they're being asked to do something that goes against what they believe is correct, right? And
Yeah.
so it's all a dialogue, right? Parents player, coaches, and then whatever governing body. So I think time spent refreshing and reminding. I mean, can you imagine if the values were read every day before every game,
Yeah, how would that reflect play even?
right? How would that
Exactly.
reflect play? And to your point, when we're talking about youth players, to reinforce that again and again and again. So by the time they get on a high school level, right, or semi-professional level, that integrity is part of who they are, right? So when a cheating scandal emerges, when someone crosses a line physically, right?
Yeah.
When something doesn't feel right, that's so imbued in them by then that they're not just sort of caught unawares and unsure of what to do, right? So again, I think that's something SIGA can really be a big part of is to help all these organizations understand human behavior and how things have to be calendared so that time is spent on what's truly important, right? And then how does that get reinforced again and again and again?
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Lynn, I can't thank you enough for taking your time to meet with us today. This has been amazing to be able to talk to you, get your insights, and really just understand fully what this part of SIGA's core principles and priorities, as well as Sports Integrity Action Month, is all about in this rapidly developing landscape of sports and business. I can't thank you enough for coming out. Like I said, I say this every episode, but I can't look forward more to editing this and re-listening to everything and really taking it in, taking more notes.
Well, I really appreciate people like you, Leah, really putting focus and attention on something as important as this arena, especially during times like this. So thank you.
Always, never a problem.